Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us. When I began my first year course at York University on business communications, my professor, who is no more, Professor Claudio Duran, taught me a very simple statement from the author Jhumpa Lahiri. He said the first sentence you write in an email or in a proposal, that sentence is the first handshake. It's the embrace, if you will. And if you want to go into an independent role or you want to build your own business, that first line, that first handshake, that first embrace dictates the future relationship you're going to have. My guest today is someone whose first handshake and first embrace I enjoyed about a year ago at the CISO forum in Niagara Falls. I didn't know this person prior. This person didn't know me. I had 2 rupees of thought in cybersecurity, and he had $2 million of them in cybersecurity and a very rich expertise in this sector. But when I first met with him and I went to his booth and he fist bumped me and said, "I love what you're doing with your students," that's when I realized this is someone that I wanted to get to know a little bit better. He wasn't hiding behind a major corporate guise, looked much like my own team, very chilled out, for lack of a better word. And when he took to the stage, the volume of information that was being flowed was quite phenomenal. I always say this to my students that integrity is not what you show other people, it is what you are behind their backs. If you're trying to get into the world of cybersecurity, you're trying to get into the world specifically of consulting independently in cybersecurity, today's session is for you. If you watched the film Cool Runnings, remember the line, feel the rhythm, feel the rhyme? Join me today as we feel the rhythm and feel the rhyme with Danny Pehar as we discuss cybersecurity and how you, as an expert in it, as a student in it, can make that decision of should I go independent and how do I need to do it. So let's feel the rhythm and feel the rhyme with Danny Pehar. Danny, welcome to the Power Hour, my man.
Ali, listen, man, I'm so happy to be here. And you know what? I remember when we first met, I meant what I said to you then, and I still mean it now. I see all the work that you do with students, with all these young people, and I think it's amazing. And I wish I knew someone like you 20 years ago. So really happy to be honored to be here, really, to be your guest.
That's very kind of you, Danny. And I know we've got 45 minutes as both of us have to head into meetings. So we're going to jump right into this. Danny, let's take at least about 2 to 3 minutes to talk about where your journey began. Because if I summarize it very quickly and I try and take an entire ocean into a little drop, I saw senior roles at TELUS, I saw senior roles in other enterprise firms, but there was an educational and an experiential journey that you went through. Walk us through that a little bit to when you then entered the world of cybersecurity. Danny?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love answering that question to people considering a career in this industry. The reason why I like telling my own experience is because they're not very impressive, not my start. And I want to let people know you can do this as well and not to be intimidated by it, right? So let me backtrack. Let me backtrack to my late teens. My late teens, I was somebody that primarily worked in factories and did a lot of work for Chuck E. Cheese. That was how I made money. And that's just what I thought working was. And I was just kind of like, this is my lot in life. Like, this is my fate. I'm not a guy that comes from the kind of family who does these big things. I will be a factory worker or I will be a restaurant worker. And that's just the way it goes. I did, however, have one dream. And my dream was, I want to work in a place where I get to sit down. Like, literally, that was really my own. Let me sit down for a living instead of stand, because I never had a job where I got to sit. And I want to work in a place, for God's sakes, that has some air conditioning, right? I never worked in an air conditioned building. And I remember I was walking through an office and I saw these people sitting on these nice chairs, and I saw these people, it was a nice air conditioned place. And I was like, this looks like a nice place. Right. And I remember they were hiring, and I was like, let me ask these guys, what this is all about. And I remember the lady there had said, listen, she goes, I've got this entry level job. She goes, it's new. It's so new that it's actually below what was previously entry level. And she's like, and I've had a couple of people who I've tried to take it, but they've all hated it because it was so entry level. And she's like, you're the runt, you're the grunt, and you're going to hate it. So she's like, you think you're up for the task? Because I don't want to hire someone that's going to quit on me. And I'm like, listen, man, I'm like, do I get one of those shares? And do I get to work in this nice air conditioned place that has internet? I didn't even have internet at home at that point. And she's kind of looking at me like, who is this guy? She goes, yeah. And I'm like, this will be the best job I've ever had. I guarantee you that. And it was. And from there, I went on and I was able to build a foundation. I got my foot in the door. It happened by sheer coincidence. It was the security industry. And while I was there, I learned two things. One I learned was I relearned a lesson that my parents were telling me my whole life. So my parents, we grew up with very humble origins. And when money is tight, sometimes what often gets discussed at around the dinner table is the importance of finding work where you're not going to run out of work, right? And so what my parents said to me was, they said, listen, they said, you know, we're like farmers, we're villagers, we don't know the modern world, but we can tell you this. If you can find a way to help regular people protect themselves against bad people, you'll never run out of work, because there's always going to be trouble, and trouble will always get worse. So if you can be on the protection side of things and find a way to make money off of that, you're never going to run out of work. And I can't believe how my dad's never been on the internet his whole life, but I can't believe how accurate he was with that, because every year in this business was bigger than the prior year. So I relearned that lesson very early on. But another lesson that I learned was, if you can bring the value to someone, if you can bring the value as in be useful to them in some way, help them save time, help them save money, make them feel better, make their life easier, whether it's a client, whether it's a boss that you're reporting to, if you bring the value, your background matters less. People aren't asking you, hey, where'd you work before this? If they're getting value from you. Right. And I'll get to that more a little bit about how you bring that value. But that was one of the things that really helped me in those early days when I had no credibility and I had no experience or nothing accomplished. But that's essentially how I got into it. I got into it purely by accident, the lowest of the low position I could possibly find. And I grew from there.
You know, these accidents can be painful, but I say this all the time, that growing is painful. And it's in those wounds that you really find your true learnings. You know, speaking of dads, you know, my dad, I always say this, is still trying to log into MSN Messenger. And much like yourself, I would say that my own journey into security was primarily because of the relations that I had, but also because of in desperate times and you need to get through something. Security and security breaches and the whole world of ethical hacking really gets you to realize that security has two sides to it, where there's the protection side, but there's also this fear side. And one of the questions that a lot of my students and a lot of my colleagues ask is that when you go into the consulting world, and someone like yourself, you know, you went into enterprise, so on and so forth, do you find yourself trading in how I can protect you? Or do you also find yourself trading in fear and telling people, if you don't go down this road, here's what's going to happen? How do you find that balance? Because often security consultants are seen to be that grim reaper that walks into the door and says, this is going to happen, it's going to happen, it's not a matter of if, it's when. But you take a different spin.
For sure. So the way I look at that is I approach it and I'll answer that in two ways. I look at it differently. Sometimes if I make you aware of something that is scary, sure, I am bringing some amount of fear to the table. Yeah. But kind of like our parents, when they'd say, look both ways before you cross the street, you know, they're giving us good advice. And if you say, well, why? Because you could get hit by a car. Are they fear-mongering? They're not fear-mongering. They're making you aware of something that you should consider. Right. So what I like to do is I like to not hit that fear-mongering so aggressively, but I do like to remind them being a little bit afraid or a little bit uncomfortable is not the worst thing in the world, right? As an example, how often have we been told when we go to the Apple store and we buy an iPhone and the guy at the store tells us, this thing can't get hacked, it's impossible. And that's wrong. That is factually incorrect. And that's what I call comfort mongering. But no one calls them out on it. Nobody ever says, you're giving me false comfort. You're comfort mongering. When you know, we hear these statements, they're saying, oh, don't worry, we're not monitoring every single thing you're doing and nobody else is looking at that. Amazon Alexa, we're not recording your stuff and sending it somewhere. nobody calls them out for comfort mongering, but they are. So I like to remind people being a little bit uncomfortable, and if I scare you a little bit, that's not such a bad thing. But the way that I get around it is I look at it like a strategy, and I look at it, and I'm a big fan of using the NIST 5-point strategy plan as a part of that conversation, right? So the NIST 5-point strategy fan is identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And so if you look at respond and recover, they are saying we do need a plan once we get attacked. We do need a plan of how we're going to respond. We do need a plan of how we're going to recover. And I say, hey, listen, that's not me. That's not marketing. This is coming directly from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And so I like to ask them, what is your current plan today? Do you have a recovery plan? And instead of just hitting them, this is going to happen and you should be scared, instead, I like to make it more of a consultative approach and ask them questions. What are you thinking here? What are you thinking here? And I like to address to see if there's any places where I can help them.
Absolutely. And this aspect of address any places where I can help them. A little bit later on, I do want to get into the realities of these new places where attacks are surfacing and these blind spots that we have from a security perspective. I want to work on something that you talked about, which is this aspect of being comfortable. And I say this all the time, is that be comfortable with being uncomfortable. There are going to be those situations. In your case, much like many of our listeners who, again, may be experts, maybe students, maybe mid-level, a lot of them, kind of like yourself, then started off in a company, started to see one particular sector and looking at the different cyber impacts that result in a particular sector. For me, it was in the telecom sector. For somebody else, the food and beverage sector, whatever have you. What did you learn during your time in enterprise? And what was that moment when you said, it's time to now make that leap into being that independent face in the world of security and be almost sector agnostic? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Excellent question. So I'll tell you two things. First, I'll tell you what I liked about enterprise and my start there and making that transition from enterprise to going independent. And then I'll focus on sort of the things that I learned and how they were very impactful to me in what I do now. So what I liked about it was being an enterprise kind of helped me figure out what I like about this. There's so many aspects to cybersecurity. It goes down, those 5 NIST points, man, each one of them can go down and you can just have a huge onslaught of information, a huge onslaught of opportunities in each one of those 5. And so being at an enterprise kind of allowed me to experiment. Let me try this, and you're being paid a salary that whole time. And you're finding what it is that you love. So that's what I like about starting off with an enterprise. And that's always a wonderful way to do it. And you're also building experience and you're building connections, you're building all kinds of great things, and someone else is paying you to do it. So that's a wonderful thing. But in terms of, from a practical point of view, what I learned there and how I was able to bring that with me was I learned 2 things. I want to go back to that value. For me, it's always been, if you bring the value, whether it's to a boss, that's how you get promoted, or whether it's to a bunch of clients, and that's when you realize, I think I can do this for myself, and I think I can become a consultant. So how do we bring the value? What I've realized is there's really 2 ways to do it. There is by being reliability, and credibility. And so I'll explain what I mean by that. Of course, we know what the definition of those 2 words mean, but I'll explain what I mean by reliability. Reliability, where that was very, very key to me, especially early on in my career where I didn't have the credibility because I wasn't a cybersecurity guy, right? I was a guy coming completely from the outside. Reliability was absolutely key. And it's something that everyone can do today. It's the one that's easier to do, but it's the one that's so often overlooked. And because it's overlooked, the bar is lowered. So when you're that person that's bringing what I'll explain in a second, everyone's looking at you as the hero. So I looked at it in a few ways. The one way that I look at it is attitude. I think so many people forget just how important it is to be easy to work with. I mean, at the end of the day, you can meet one of the most impressive presidents or CEOs that you've ever met. We just want to work with people that we like at the end of the day. What kind of energy, what kind of vibe am I getting from this person, right? And I remember at one point I was leading a team. I was a director and I was in charge of a team maybe about 10 years into my career. And I was hiring for this one job, and this one guy, young kid, he comes in and he says to me, I want this job so bad. During downtime, I'll sweep the floors, man. He goes, just give me the job. And I loved that attitude so much. And I was like, this guy is so hungry. He's so willing to work. He's going to be so easy to work with. Yeah. He didn't really matter to me, the rest of his credentials. I hired him based on that, right? So bring the right attitude. 2, be really good at the basics. If you're starting out, if you're a student, you might not be good at the advanced stuff, or you might not be a master of the advanced, but never underestimate the power of the basics. Showing up on time, calling people back when you say you're going to call them back, and doing those little things. Early, my first year on the job, I was running this one conference call, and it was with Toronto Police, and it was their cybersecurity team, and it was with my team. And I was at Allstream at the time, and a bunch of engineers from my team. So we got these guys, a bunch of guys here, a bunch of guys here, me in the middle, and I'm the only guy that doesn't understand what anyone's saying, right? We're talking about this one project. We're trying to figure out what's going on. I can't understand, like, these guys are, it sounds like they're speaking like another language. Yeah. And every time I would run the call, and I'm like, okay, Toronto Police, why don't you explain to us, what you need or what you think you need? And then I'd go to my guys, okay, Team Allstream, what do you think and about what they said? And I just kept going back and forth, back and forth. So I hung up the call, and I was like, man, I feel like an imposter. I don't belong here. I think I should quit, because I didn't understand a word of that call. And I'm thinking they all know it. They're all laughing. They're like, Danny doesn't know what he's talking about. And later, the head from Toronto Police, she calls me, and she's like, Danny, I want to thank you so much. It was the best run call that I was on. We had so many people, and you were keeping us all organized. And that's when I realized, hey, I don't need to be a master yet. I just need to be really good at the basics, and organization is one of them, right? So bring that to the table with you. And the other thing is good communication skills. Yeah. I cannot overestimate the importance of that enough. And I break that down into 2 main categories. One, you got to respect it. I know with a lot of subject matter experts, they tend to think, I'm so smart, I don't need to be a good communicator because I know the right answer. Now, I remember at another point in my career, there was an engineer that was having some trouble with her career, and she was asking me to help her with her presentation skills. And so I said, I'd be happy to. And she's like, good, because I'm not good at that kind of bullshit that you're good at.
I pretty much figured out where that person was from with that accent. Good job.
I'm like, lesson number 1, I'm like, you're asking me for my help and you're insulting me. So let's not do that. And I'm like, why do you think it's bullshit? And she's like, because I have the answer, and you're just making it sound good. And I'm like, well, if that's how you feel, then why put the work in improving that? If it is bullshit, like, why do it? And she's like, because nobody understands me when I speak. And I was like, aha. So therefore, it's not bullshit. It's important because you need to be understood, right? So 1, we got to respect that that's necessary. The other thing, really important, especially at any point in your career, know your audience. There was a younger friend of mine that was working, and she was coming up for her review, and she wanted to ask for a raise. And she goes, oh, I know you like communication. I know you're good at that sort of stuff. And she's like, can I run it by you? So I said, yeah, sure. And so she goes, the reason she's practicing. She goes, the reason I want to raise is because I got a new apartment and my rent is much more expensive, and, I need more money. And I'm like, I'm going to stop you right there. I'm like, know your audience. Does your boss care about your rent? That's your problem. That's not his problem. Right? And I'm like, you've got to make it about them. You've got to tell them, listen, I deserve a raise because of X, 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 and this is how it's going to benefit you. I'll be happier. I'll be even more productive. You got to make it about them, not about your problem, right? When you know your audience, then your communication is going to be that much bigger. And by the way, just on a side note, I was talking to a school about this, and I was telling them this story, and one of the teachers was like, Danny, I don't know if you did this intentionally. He goes, but you just said attitude, basic communication. He goes, that's ABC. And I was like, that was purely by accident, but it's a good way to remember it. And I find that if you really bring the reliability, you can bring so much value because so many people aren't doing that. You will find opportunities even without the credibility. In time, the credibility will get there. And the way that I worked on the credibility, really simply, is for me, where things really started to change, honestly, I signed up for Google Alerts. I signed up for Google Alerts on various topics, cyber breach, hack, what have you. Pick things that I thought were interesting to me. And with an industry like ours, you got to keep at it and you got to know what's current. That's how you know what the trends are. That's how you know what's up. And I don't spend, Google Alerts will send you a lot. I don't read all of them, but I'll scroll through and I'll look if something's interesting. And so when something comes, I know about it because I'm checking it every day. And then once I look at what's hot or what's out there, a quick way that I find that I can master a topic fairly quickly is a little tip that I'll give you guys is I do research on what are the most important questions people are asking about this new topic. So I'll give you an example. A few years back, cyber insurance saved a client of mine. I'd never heard of it, never heard of cyber insurance. And I was like, this is so powerful. This is so big. And remember what I said about NIST, right? What was that fifth one? Recover, right? Man, how are you going to recover without cyber insurance? I'm like, this actually completes the NIST framework. I'm like, this is friggin' brilliant. So I wanted to learn more about it. So how do you learn about it? There's a lot of info. So I just started searching, what are the most popular questions people want to know about cyber insurance? And I started seeing they're pretty common. The most popular, it's not hard to figure out what the questions are. The questions were, what is it? Nobody knew. What does it cover? What doesn't it cover? Is it worth it? Those are the 4 most popular questions. Once you know the questions, man, finding the answers is even easier because you just do an online search for that. So what I did then was I then started taking my questions and I started using that to tell people, hey, I want to talk to you about this new thing, cyber insurance. And as a part of my talk, I'm going to be answering these 4 questions. And I'd simply list the questions. Holy cow, everyone and their mother wanted to talk to me about that. I started a business that I ended up selling that did extremely well for me. That was a game changer for me, was jumping on that really quickly. I remember people were reaching out to me on LinkedIn, a lot of people from California, and they were, and I'd be like, how did you find me? How do you even know of me? I'm not advertising this. And they're like, because I did a LinkedIn search for cyber insurance. Yours is the only name that came up, right? And I was like, oh my God, for once in my life, I'm like really ahead of the curve, right? And that was that strategy that I employed there. Later on and recently, I had equity in this platform, this portal that I had built, and we sold that portal to Aon Insurance. Again, because I was very familiar with that industry, it all started with that. That really helped me out there. So do Google Alerts, sign up for that. And once you sign up for that, if you find an interesting topic, find out what are the questions we want to know, find out the answers to those questions, and use that as a way to speak to people. Hey, these are the questions I'm going to answer. Let's talk. Everyone's going to want to talk to you.
I want to work with that piece of everyone is going to want to talk to you because you went through this journey of reliability and credibility. And with reliability, you're emphasizing those skills of answer your emails, make sure you've got a way for people to reach out to you, make sure that you're there on the table on time, so on and so forth. But let's talk a little bit about when you go into a space, whether, such as yourself, you go into it persona non grata, a bit of a tabula rasa in the world of security, and then you learn on the job. Kind of risky, but you take that risk because you know how you can go back. And you really toggle between risk and risky really, really well. But then a lot of times people go into the sphere of saying, look, we're hearing that, the number of breaches, 4.1 million at the end of every quarter. We're hearing the growth of 63% in the number of phishing campaigns, whatever have you. The liability associated with getting things wrong. How do you adjust yourself to that? Because if you're just starting off in the world of security, as a consultant or not, getting it wrong can have severe repercussions. How do you prepare your mindset for that?
For sure. So if we talk about there's a few things to get wrong. If you talk about getting it wrong from the point of view of yourself, like your own career or your own business, right? I don't like taking big risks. And that's why there's a few ways that I look at it. And I don't like encouraging people to do that either. Not unless I know exactly who you are, not unless I know, I need to know more about you before I encourage you to take that risk. But that's what I love about when you're first starting out, when you're young, that's why I like about starting at an enterprise, because you are being paid to figure things out. And who knows, maybe you'll hate cybersecurity. Like maybe you'll realize that this isn't for me, right? That's okay. You quit, you go somewhere else. right? And so finding a job allows you to figure yourself out, allows you to figure out, what works for you, and it does it while someone else is paying you. Vice versa, though, it's not a bad time to think about a side hustle or some sort of business either, because you can do that probably while you're living with your parents, right? Most people, you get a family, you get, you're living on your own, what have you, and you decide, I think I want to start a business. Well, even if you can start the business at a relatively inexpensive price, you're not getting a salary, right? No one's paying you to do that unless you're getting the client. And so there is a risk there. However, early on, in the very early days, if you can somehow pull that off, you're doing it, and hey, you're living with your parents and they're paying the bills, not a bad time to do it as well, right? That being said, I sometimes toggle back and forth between that. I think what I prefer about the enterprise way, though, is you build up credibility and contacts, you build up the partners that are really going to help you, right? So that's really how I like to look at that. Partners and contacts have really been so helpful to me during this process of going independent, because you suddenly realize also when you're independent, it's suddenly lonely. You don't have all these colleagues that you can call for help. So you need partners, you need people that you get along with, and you need people that you can network with. It is easier to find a lot of those contacts going the enterprise route, right? So in terms of taking risk away from it, that's kind of how I like to look at it, right?
Let's work a little bit with the timing piece, because very often when I speak to fellow colleagues, and again, a variety of them in the college, university sector, but in the private sector as well, various companies that are on cyber exchange, like Zscaler, Palo Alto, Fortinet, The Works, VMware. When I have conversations over coffee or virtual coffee with many of them, everyone talks about this idea of, I want to start something, but is it too late? And my mantra to them has always been, it's never too late to be early. It just depends on what you are coming at the table to do.
100%.
Perspective matters. You mentioned this aspect about partners. As a consultant now that you've branched away in this independent space of your own, how do you create that vendor relationship management process for yourself? How do you tie yourself with certain services and certain partners? What's your strategy there to ensure that besides your own brain trust and the wealth of your experience, you're also able to tap into the infrastructure that you require while sitting in your home?
Yeah, 100%. And I want to touch on something that you said at the beginning. So you kind of listed made two thought points there that I really liked. I'll touch on that first part, though. It's very near and dear to my heart when people say, is it too late for me? And what I'll do is I want to bring back to one of the very first things I said when you and I started talking, and that is bring the value. When you bring the value, it doesn't matter if you're too early in your career. It doesn't matter if you're too late. If you're bringing the value, then that's something that people will pay for. Early on in my career, I didn't have the credibility. I wasn't the cybersecurity expert that I didn't know all that stuff. But man, I was the guy people wanted to work with because I was friendly and I was organized. Like what Toronto Police had said to me, I brought the value. And so she didn't say to me, hey, did you work at Chuck E. Cheese before here? Because that sucks. Like, you shouldn't be here. She didn't say that because she knew he's bringing the value. And so if you're thinking, have I been doing this? Am I too old? Is it too late for me to start? Well, that depends. Do you think you can bring value to someone? If you can, and if you can find a way to charge for that value, then it's never too late. It's just a question of, are you bringing the value? So as for the partnerships, for me, what I want to do is I'll tell you an evolution of thinking that I thought. The evolution for me was originally when I would look for partners, I wanted partners who I thought, man, these would be great for me to have these guys in my corner. I was really just looking about it as what they could do for me. And that was a wrong way to look at it. So I'll explain what I mean. So there was one organization that I had signed, and I had signed, went through their contracts. Officially, I became their partner, right? And the idea was these guys were going to resell my services. And I was like, holy cow, this is like a multi-billion-dollar company. They're going to resell my services. Like, this is going to be like a license to print money.
Yep.
but it didn't work. They weren't pushing my stuff. It wasn't coming up. And so I kept thinking, like, I don't understand, like, how come this isn't working, right? These guys are so big. I don't compete with them. Like, I offer something that's complementary, right? It makes sense. Why isn't it working? And I realized that although the sales I were making were profitable to me and they paid one guy enough, when you're filtering through a large organization, and by the time it makes its way down to their sales reps don't make a lot off of my stuff. Right?
Right.
Their quotas at these big places, it's like $10 million a year, right? I mean, of that 10 million, they're not getting to keep a lot, but they need to sell 10 million a year, like each sales guy, right? So an independent like me, yeah, he's not going to make any money off of what I'm selling. But then what I did was I found other guys who could keep the lion's share of what they sold. So I would say, hey, listen, you work with me, you sell this, you get paid this. It's not going to the company that's going to take all the pieces, and by the time it gets to you, you get nothing, right? So the company was smaller, but the guy was making a lot more money by working with me. And those companies worked really well. We ended up having a really great relationship because I started looking at it differently. I wasn't just partnering with places that I wanted to partner with. I was partnering with places who would benefit from me. So the benefit needs to be both. You definitely want somebody that you want, but they need to want you. It needs to be worth their while, or it's just not going to work, right? Yeah. So definitely that was an evolution of thought for me. The other thing is you want someone that doesn't compete with you, right, but that tells a really nice story, that complements you. So as an example, and I always go back to NIST. You'll find people are probably sick of me talking about it, but literally it organized it for us very nicely in all we need to think about security in 5 categories: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And for me, we're hearing all these stories about cybercrime being a business. I'm seeing all these IoT devices everywhere. I'm seeing all these increased points of vulnerability. And I'm thinking to myself, we really should be good at recovering and responding. So then I thought, then I need to make some friends with people that do that for a living. So recovery, cyber insurance, it's not cybersecurity. It doesn't compete with us, but we play very nicely together. I started making friends with a lot of people in that business. That worked wonders for me. The other thing, recovery. So what are we learned over the last 2 years about recovery? About response, rather. We've learned that responding to a breach, because of all the new compliances and the new laws, man, that can get really complicated and that can get really expensive. Look at Uber. 2016, Uber was hit with a ransomware. The bad guys stole 100K from them as a result of that hit. They were fined because they did everything wrong. They didn't respond properly, okay? What do you think they were fined? They were fined, I'll pause for dramatic effect, 148 million. The bad guys stole 100K. The government fined them 148 million, okay? 1,000 times more than 1,000 times of what the bad guys took. Right. So, in other words, man, that really matters. So suddenly, the term breach coach started to become very popular. Breach coach is a lawyer. They help you respond to those sorts of things. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that's super important. They're not cybersecurity, but they play well with me. Let me go make friends with some breach coach lawyers. So I started making friends with people, or as an example, if you focus on protection and detection, maybe you have a managed service company, or maybe you want to do something like that. And you think, okay, I'm doing protection and detection, but what about identification? Maybe I'll partner with someone that does the identification aspect of it. So I check to see what part of NIST do I want to play in, and who should I be friends with from NIST that does other things that I don't do. I don't want them to compete with me. I want them to complement me. And then you send each other people all the time, and it makes sense and it becomes a beautiful thing. But there's got to be something in it for them, and there's got to be something in it for you. And that took me I wasted a lot of time by focusing on a lot of people that I only wanted, but they weren't going to do well off of me, and that didn't work for me.
You know, I'm a big fan of this idea. Everything that you just said, that whole narrative, I can capture it into this idea of, I say this all the time, is don't go with the flow, but be your own flow. In that whole NIST framework, you found recover and respond is where I want to sort of find my niche and where I want to create my signature identity. And it's important, especially to everyone listening here, is that the world of cybersecurity, well, if you talk to some of the advisors on our advisory, whether you talk to Farouk, Mark Dillon, Kalyan Chakravarti, whoever you talk to, or Kush Sharma, the CISO from the city of Toronto, they'll tell you that know what you don't know and know more about what you know. The more
Yep.
clients you get, the more familiar you get with breach coaching, the more you want to learn about it, the more you want to specialize in it, the more you want to adhere to the fact that perfection is always being in a state of work in progress. And I think
Yes.
what you've done really well now for yourself is you've defined that niche where you're saying, this is where I can help you, and this is how I'm going to help you. But I also want to talk about the fact that in doing all of this, you've also built a track record. One of the things that I've noticed a lot about you is you'll post on LinkedIn very often. You'll share, you'll big up other people as well, who may even be your competitors in some cases because you've learned something from them. As a consultant, how important is it for you to share the joy and share the credit and really applaud when applause is required? Danny?
Oh man, it's so important. It's so important because we're a community, and you can argue anyone in security. You can argue is a competitor to anyone else, right? But there's so much people that need this stuff. Like I don't really look at it as competition. It's not like there's enough. I mean, what are they saying? I was reading one article, and what were they saying by like I don't know, by the end of this year, like it's going to be in the trillions, cybersecurity spent, something ridiculous. Like that's a ridiculous number. Every time I check, it gets higher. I don't even bother checking anymore, right? And you look at all that money that's being spent in this industry. At the end of the day, I'm not too worried about competition because, man, there is enough. Right? There's a huge skills gap. If anything, there's not enough of us, right? And so in terms of bigging each other up, for me, that goes back to what I said about attitude. And it's the kind of, I think that we've got one life to live. The life is hard enough as it is. You look on the news, you see all those terrible things about what's happening in 2020, and we got to support each other. And whether we're talking about supporting each other as cybersecurity, or whether we're talking about supporting each other as consultants or independent business, or just people who happen to know each other through LinkedIn or whatever, man, if we're not going to lift each other up, who else is going to do it? Right. So I think that's incredibly important. And I think people then get a vibe from your energy. Someone else might see what you're doing. They see you supporting somebody or complimenting someone. And they might say like, well, you know what, that person's not complimenting me, but they seem really nice. Like I like the way they do it. And at the end of the day, we want to work with people that we like working with. Right. So I think that's really, really important. It puts your name out there. People see what you're doing. They see that you're friendly. They see that you're involved. And that's a big way when you're starting out. That's a big way to make new friends and to make new contacts that will eventually spend money with you because they see what you're doing. They see you're active. Right. And they get to know you, and you're not spending money. You're not buying advertisements. You're not spending expensive marketing campaigns. You're just doing work, and you're doing it publicly. And if somebody does something good, you thank them for it. It's the right thing to do, but it's also a good thing to do for you as well. Right. So absolutely incredibly important, whether you want to stay on the enterprise side of things for your career, very important. And if you want to go on the consulting side and you want to do your own thing, incredibly important there as well. Absolutely.
That aspect of community, and whether it's, I'll take a bit of a plug here at the cyberexchange.ca community. I mean, I really enjoyed the fact that, and one of the reasons why many of us continue to partake in CyberX and Cyber Exchange, look, they pivoted at a very difficult time, developed a beta environment, invited people in, built a community now of 800 odd people where you can connect to people and have conversations. But in that aspect of community, I found that there's a lot of learning. And I think what I've learned
Yes.
from you is this aspect of, look, the good ones, the good practitioners learn from their own mistakes, but the really great ones learn also from the mistakes of others. And the only way you're going to learn those mistakes of others is having these exchanges and taking that 45-minute time during your lunch break to say, I want to have this conversation. It's what you put in. Now we've got about 15 minutes left, and I want to chime in on some of the questions that are coming in. So we'll sort of take a dive into that, and then I'll make sure people can connect with you directly as well if they have questions. I hope everyone's enjoying the quality production. A shout out to the team at CyberX. I'm watching the live stream as well. It looks slick, so thank you for that. The question that I have coming in, I'm going to weave it in a bit of a if you watch cricket, it's a bit of a googly question. It's going to spin this way and the other as well at the same time. And that is this aspect of where do you as a consultant where do you look at in terms of the size of business in order to determine if this is where I need to focus my energy? Right now, with hyper virtualization, almost everyone is now thinking about their security posture. Would you say that now, given the pandemic, budding consultants, existing consultants, or future consultants should start to now drive their narrative to targeting smaller businesses? Or do you think it's nothing much has changed and that you can just go for whoever wants your services? How do you segment your opportunities?
I'm really glad that you asked me that question. I learned that one the hard way. So I got a very good answer. Just before I answer that question, I just want to touch on what you said about CyberX, about community. Man, everything that CyberX has done has been phenomenal. And I encourage anyone, if you guys aren't participating as much yet, get involved with these guys more. That CISO event where we met, holy cow. Not only did I get so many great relationships of like new people that I still talk to this day from that event, but man, it was just a lot of fun, right? Like that night, holy cow, I had so much fun. I felt like a kid, right? Every time I was involved with you guys, it's been awesome in terms of just a great experience. I learned something fun, but the contacts, man, wow, awesome. So let me go back to that question. So what I learned there is very similar to what I learned about who I wanted to partner with when I started. Remember how I said, when I wanted to partner, give me the biggest partnerships you got, right? And I didn't really see anything from those partnerships. And when it came to clients, I was like, give me the biggest clients you got, man. I'm going right to the banks. I knew a couple of people who I figured can get me in, and I'm like, banks, they're spending in the millions, right? Holy cow, you just get one of those banks, a consultant that gets to keep, more profit of what they're doing, you can make a fortune off of just one. Yeah. But here's the problem. They are so big. And a lot of times they can do a lot of their own consulting. And they take forever to do anything. And they've got so many different things. And sometimes a decision is based simply on who's doing business with them, right? Sometimes they've got companies that are spending millions with them, right? You think the banks you think that they don't have a plan to give some of that money back to them? It's kind of like, listen, man, I'm a tech company and I'm spending so much money with you. You're gonna give me some of that business back, and you're gonna be hiring from me, right? And I spent so much time, and they will talk to you, and they will sit with you, and they will do all that stuff, but they just won't buy. And that's when I saved myself a lot of time and a lot of you just don't waste your time. Don't go for people that are that big because they just don't need it. If you want to talk about being the independent consultant. Now, that being said, what I like to look at is I'm a big fan of the range of at around, let's say, the 100 people range. 100 people more is okay too. Less is okay, but I do like the 100 people range. And the way that I determine a range that I like is, here's a trick that I use. The trick that I use is if they have someone on staff that has security in their title, as an example, if it says, director of security or VP of security, they might be too big for you. But rather, if the person in charge of security has IT in their title, not security, but rather they're in charge of all of IT, so VP of IT, manager of IT, director of IT, I find those are a great place to start, right? Because one, if they have an IT department, they are big enough that they're going to need to spend some money on this, right? You don't want to go for people that are so small that they don't even have an IT department. But two, they're not so big that they're, that it's one of those things that's just like, you don't even bother with them, right? So I do love to play in that one. Look for people at around 100 people, more or less is okay, but more so look for the title and does it say IT in the title instead of security? Now, I'm not saying you're never going to be working with someone that's a director of security and maybe they can be your best client ever, but I'm talking about a good overall strategy. Focus on where it says IT. The other thing, look into something called data mining and look into something for low cost data mining. Man, that was a huge time saver for me. Data mining, there are people that do this and they're very good at it and they do it for low prices and they can get you a list. You buy it off of them. They can get you a list of, you tell them, I want a list of 100, 500, 1,000, and they'll get you a list and it'll say, Here's the company. You choose the company. You choose the industry. You choose the approximate company size, and you choose the title. And they'll get you their name, phone number, email. It's awesome. Do some searches for data mining services, low-cost data mining services, and they'll get you lists of whatever you need. That'll be very helpful.
Fantastic. And we've got about 7 more minutes. I'm going to rush through 2 other questions. And again, I'm going to try my best to bake them as richly as I can. The other question that's come in is about this aspect of you need to come in with the ammo, for lack of a better word. And at one end, you have street cred in terms of you have experience, you're known in the industry, you're published, so on and so forth. But a lot of folks look at the designations that somebody holds. How much do you value the designations as a ticket into the door? And what kind of designations do you think today a lot of our listeners need to be paying attention to?
So I would say that, okay, I'm going to say something a bit controversial here. When I go in, I don't actually lead with my background. I don't lead in with, I don't start talking about Forbes magazine or my work with the FBI or companies that I've sold. A lot of times, if anything, I'll talk about Chuck E. Cheese. I actually will downplay that, right? In terms of my credentials, in terms of my security certifications, before I tell you my thoughts on that, guess how many I have? I have zero. Zero security certifications.
I did my research.
So there you go. But again, the FBI has never asked me, hey, Danny, by the way, before we do anything with you, how many certifications do you have? Forbes never asked me that. Danny, before we let you write about cybersecurity, how many certifications? Why? Because I start talking about, I bring the value. If you lead with the value, right? So when as an example, PIPEDA's coming, when it was changing its law, and I would say to them, hey guys, just out of curiosity, are you ready for the upcoming PIPEDA changes? And they're like, yeah, Danny, I'm not even really sure what they are. I'm not ready for it, no. Well, you know what? Here are the 5 most popular questions people ask, and I list them out. I'd love to tell you about it. You want to hear about it? Yeah. Boom, instantly, he's not asking me, what are your certifications? He's not asking me, what's your background, right? Because I'm bringing the value. Cyber insurance. When that was on the tip of everyone's tongue, right? Hey, what are you doing about cyber insurance? Yeah, I don't know, man. You know, I heard about it. It's weird. I don't know anything about it. Well, you know what? These are the 4 questions I'd like to answer for you. You want to talk? Yeah, right away. And while you have that conversation, now I'm not there to sell them cyber insurance because I don't do that, but I start peppering other things. Hey, you know what? Let me tell you about the NIST framework, right? This is where I like it because NIST, it fits in really nicely in recovery. Hey, by the way, since we've got the NIST framework open here in my presentation, what are you doing for response services? Oh, well, you know what, Danny, ... Well, hey, listen, here's how I can help you. What about detection services? What are you doing for that? And next thing you know, you're having a conversation. Yeah. I find that when you do it the reverse, when you say, I'd like to talk to you because here are my certifications. Care to hear what I have to say? They're not going to care because that's all about you. When you say, I want to talk to you because I write for Forbes and I've worked with the FBI. It's all about me. They're going to care less. You got to bring the value and make it about them. Find out what you think they need to know and start talking about that. And boom, those things don't matter as much. And yes, certifications are important. I'm not saying don't get your certifications. Why are they important? They're important because they often symbolize knowledge. Get the knowledge though. That's really what I'm all about. Like once you have the knowledge, whether you actually finish and get that certification, it doesn't matter as much to me. Be the guy that knows what they're talking about. I want to talk to the guy that I know has the knowledge behind that certification. If he has the knowledge behind that certification or she has the knowledge behind that, I don't need to know whether they have the certification because they're proving it. They're living it right now as they're talking to me. So that's what you got to lead with. Always lead with the value, not with your diploma or your certification.
Absolutely. And there's that statement, right? Is that a lot of people know the price of everything, but the value of nothing. And this is exactly where, I talk about value. I could really go on a narrative on this, but I do see 2 more questions. So we'll take 5 minutes and wrap it up and then have a quick conversation in the green room. Jordan, again, thank you for streaming through all these lovely data points and questions. Love it. Danny, the next question that I have here is perhaps not directly related to the world of consulting as an individual, but it does talk about diversity in the world of cybersecurity consultants. And while a stat hasn't been quoted, it's an observation which everybody's free to make. is it still seems to be very, very male dominated. In your opinion, how can we shatter that?
I love that you asked me that question. And I spoke about this at your Women in Cybersecurity event
Yep.
back in, actually back before the big shutdown, back in March.
2 days before the shutdown.
Yeah, yeah. And it's something that I'm very passionate about. The reason I'm very passionate about it is, for me, I was hired into this business by a woman. And I'm still friends with her till this day. And I was trained by almost all women. Like when I look at it, I can pinpoint and I can name them. We're still good friends. The best leaders that I've had were all women. And I remember I was actually talking to one of those women before your event. And I was telling her about this, and I was like, yeah, but there's not a lot of women in this industry. And I go, I didn't even know that, because I actually had the good fortune of being everywhere I went. Had a lot of women that were working there. They were all my leaders. And she said the same thing. She goes, yeah, I've been seeing that stat. She goes, I didn't know. She goes, because I only know women in this industry. So we kind of had a little bit of a bubble there. And what I would say to that is that's a shame, because if not for those women, I wouldn't be where I am today. They were so integral to just my entire 20 years. So what I would say is I think what's important in how we get women into this is start talking to them at younger ages, and to keep doing what it is that you guys are doing. You guys are great at this, but to keep doing things like that, and to let them know this is a great career, and we need women, we need their insight into this business, into this career. But yes, I have realized it is the numbers aren't very good, the stats aren't very good, and I apologize. I was living in a bubble. I didn't even know that, because I have all women friends that are in this business. Yeah, I think what we need to do is we need to let people know at a younger age that this is something that that females are needed, and they do very well.
Fantastic. Now, there are a few more questions, but I'll take one last comment, have you talked it, and then we'll wrap up. And that is a comment that says, I agree fully with what you're saying on certifications, but often as a young cybersecurity practitioner, I do want to get into a little bit of a comfort zone in terms of getting some income, getting some stability while I plan my side hustle. But often to get through the door, I need a certification. Sometimes companies won't even talk to me if I'm not certified so and so. Are you saying that that's the wrong way of looking at credentials, or?
No, not at all, not at all. So depending on the role that you're looking at doing, and yes, depending on certain roles, they need certifications, especially early on. Absolutely. Right. So I was speaking when the way that the initial question was asked was about when you're talking to a client. So I'm an independent, and I'm going to help you make your business. They don't necessarily care so much about that. They more so care about, I need someone's help. I don't care about your certifications. When we're talking about applying for a job, the way that I like to look at it is, honestly, I first look at what aspect of NIST is what I want to do. Do I want to be on the respond and recover side? Do I want to be on the threat intelligence side? Do I want to be on the protection side? Then I like to check to see what are the kind of jobs that I can see myself doing. You could do an easy online search for what is the job in this industry? What is a beginner level job? Then I look at what are the requirements for that job. Once I see that, that's how I decide what certifications I'm going to get. I simply check to see where do I want to go and what's required to get there. And if that requires a certification, then I get the certification. Simple as that.
Like I always like to say, these certifications provide you with the ingredients. At the end of the day, you still need to bring it all together. You still need to cook it and make sure that it is that recipe for success that you're looking for. Danny,
100%.
my man, the hour needs more minutes in order to continue the conversation with you. But I know both of us have places to be. I'm going to take the next 30 seconds just to summarize our chat, and then we'll have some closing comments, just me, you, and the CyberX team in the green room. To the audience that's paying attention to today's session, there's one thing that I deliberately did not bring up in this conversation, and that is the aspect of consistency. I've been engaging with Danny Pehar for over a year, and we've met in person quite often. In fact, quite recently, we had a quick meeting at the studio, socially distant. But every time that I've met with Danny online, you'll notice a lot of consistency. The background is the same, a nice little comfortable sofa behind him, the window blinds or the California shutters, the nice little handle there, the shirt. you'll notice consistency. You'll know what you get from Danny every time. There are no surprises. It's always ready and relatable right away in terms of what service you're going to get. And that level of consistency, let me remind you, is one of the fundamental characteristics of a good, successful, trustworthy consultant. So that C in the ABC that Danny brought up, I would also say that has to relate to consistency. And another thing that I didn't deliberately bring up is, we could talk more in detail about technicalities around security. And if you want, we can have more sessions. And I know Danny will join us. But I'll tell you one other thing, which I didn't bring up deliberately. Danny didn't tell you any of his stories when he's been hurt, when he's been, for lack of a better word, stabbed in the back. But as the patron saint Ali always says, that be like the flower that gives its fragrance even to the hand that crushes it. Giving that fragrance away has brought Danny to where he's at today. Danny, I want to thank you for your humility. I want to thank you for taking the time. I'm going to request you to stay online for just another 30 seconds so we can meet in the green room. And to our audience, thank you very much. Danny, any closing comments?
My pleasure. I love what you're doing with these guys. I love what CyberX is doing. And to everyone else, connect with each other. You guys are going to be your best contacts going forward. Find me on LinkedIn. Let's connect.
Keep it real, everybody. Over to the CyberX team. Have a safe, long weekend, everyone. Take care. Bye for now.